Welcome to LCGC's podcast, Achieving Digital Transformation Within the Scientific Laboratory. This podcast is brought to you by Astrix Technology Group, a global leader in laboratory informatics serving the scientific community. To find out more, please go to www.astrixinc.com. And now, here's your host for this podcast, the contributing editor for LCGC, Kim Decker.
Hello, everyone. This is Kim Decker, contributing editor for LCGC, and I'm here with Dale Curtis. He's president of professional services at Astrix Technology Group, and I'm with Dr. Bridgette Chambers as well. She's president of outsourced services also at Astrix. Thank you both for being here today, Dale and Bridgette.
Well, thanks so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Great. Well, why don't we get started? So first, tell us, who is Astrix Technology Group?
Sure. Astrix Technology Group, we're a vendor-independent scientific consulting and outsourced solution provider. And, we really focus on solving complex problems that reside at that crossroad between really diverse scientific areas and domains with IT. We're all scientists here, engineers, informaticians, architects, analysts, and we're really in the business of helping that scientific focused community deploy innovative solutions that really allow clients to turn data into knowledge, increase organizational efficiencies, and improve quality, ultimately facilitate regulatory compliance. Unlike traditional IT consulting companies, Astrix is really all about the science. It's at the core of everything that we do. And it's really critical in enabling us to solve those complex problems that really reside in the biopharma, pharmaceutical, chemical, and energy companies that we serve.
Well, what does it mean to digitally transform your laboratory?
Yes, this is a term that's really used in so many different contexts. And I guess it's really important to step back and understand that it really means not to focus on a micro component of your work process in your lab, but to actually identify and address a given process end to end, right? So to digitally transform is not to bring in a new system, like storing your reports or calculating data, doing any type of analysis or visualization. It's not about a single system. It's really about looking at the complete process that experimental design comes from. For example, if you take an analytical laboratory, you might get varying requests, or something more nebulous if it's a synthetic laboratory. How do you decide what you're going to do in the lab? How do you use what you just executed to make an informed decision or to create a report? Remember, the goal is to remove manual processes. So specifically, you want to improve data capture throughout the entire process. So to me, any type of digital transformation, it's really about tackling the end-to-end process and not any single system, which tends to be a very tactical approach to it.
Well, what benefits should labs expect to see from digitalization?
Yeah, so I guess back to my point earlier, if you're aligned strategically to really impact an end-to-end process, there are real quantifiable benefits that can come from such an effort. For example, one is a significant reduction in manual entry of information. You can actually measure how much time scientists spend on manual operations, including things like manual transcription or, data from one system to another, for example. Data review and verification, preparation of reports, extraction of data, they're all types of manual aspects, and they carry a lot of quality issues, right? So in fact, digitizing these types of workflows can really reduce or eliminate some of those manual transcription errors. And all of these aspects can be measured. So if you think about, there's a couple of published studies around this, and one comes to mind. It's something that I read in the Medical Laboratory Observer. They've actually reported on average 15% error in manual transcription during a routine analytical test. So think about the risk associated with that and how it can impact things like quality metrics and QBD, or quality by design, and data integrity. Another area that we've often found that's somewhat quantifiable, is speed of access to data. For example, if two pharmaceutical companies are collaborating together. They're producing data on demand, for a client, for example, right? It involves a significant number of manual processes. And if you work to achieve that end-to-end digitalization, you're really able to address these types of requests a lot more efficiently.
Well, what sort of a timeline are we looking at to get a digital transformation?
Well, this is highly variable, and it really depends on where you're starting from. If we think about the paths that companies follow along the transition from traditional research to digital maturity, there's an evolutionary process that occurs from ideation all the way through the entire digital journey. Most importantly, there needs to be an organizational evolution to foster this type of transformative environment, underpinned by evolutionary changes surrounding connectivity, process improvements, and the development of necessary skills to support the effort. Companies will inevitably be proceeding down some path in each of these categories. In some cases, you're starting from nothing. And oftentimes that's actually a better place to start than if you're starting from a scenario where you may have a bunch of 10-year-old systems, for example, that are barely keeping up with what your current lab processes are. So just to speak a little bit more to that, for example, let's take an analytical laboratory that's doing traditional work. That's a much more focused project that could be achieved in about a year's time. If you're really going end to end and planning to tackle a significant scope, it could take several years. So it really goes back to that first question: how big is the end-to-end scope that you've identified? So I guess in summary, don't underestimate the time, and significance of a type of effort like this, regardless of the scope. It's not just buying a system from a vendor and plunking it in.
Well, what are the biggest challenges to expect when starting a digitalization effort?
That's a good question, and it's really around that people thing I mentioned before. We're talking about working habits and cultural elements, and these are really big challenges. You're talking about changing people's work habits and their readiness to accept that kind of change. Will they embrace it? Are they going to be passionate about it? Or will they be opposing the change or pushing back? So I really don't think the biggest challenges here are technical. Not that there aren't going to be technical challenges, there certainly will be. But I don't think they'll be the biggest challenges for companies that want to do digital transformation. If you do the end-to-end workflow analysis, you can't just assume that some vendor's three-letter acronym is going to solve it. LIMS, ELN, or whatever. Those three-letter acronyms, they've really lost a lot of meaning in the last 5 to 10 years. There used to be a real difference between ELN and LIMS, but that's really no longer true. Some people think they need a LIMS to do what really would be much better suited in an electronic lab notebook. Actually, some ELNs in the GXP space, they're not even ELNs. They're actually LIMS systems with a different user interface. But people have transformed these systems to behave certain ways, and a lot of times they were never, built or intended to behave in that way to begin with. So another challenge, not just the sheer navigation through the landscape of so many different solution providers or so-called platform providers that are pitching silver bullets to achieve digital transformation. It's just not the case. So yes, there are technical challenges, but I believe the biggest one is really altering that working habits of your organization.
Well, an important point, as you all know, we're right in the middle of quite a lot of disruption and uncertainty already, thanks to COVID-19. So why not just delay or pause digital transformation?
Yeah, that's definitely a point that many organizations are making today. They find it a prudent point to push projects into the future. They're trying to save a little bit of money. And I would argue that this is a short-term strategy for companies that are trying to, basically survive. But for those companies that are trying to thrive, investment in digital transformation increases their competitiveness. And it does, in fact, help them to be more agile during uncertain times, such as the one that we find ourselves in. I think we could do a podcast simply on the reasons you would want to prioritize your digital transformation. And if we did that podcast, I think we'd be here for most of the day. So instead of going through such a long list, let me highlight 3 trends that I think would support prioritizing your digital transformation for now. COVID-19 clearly illustrates the need for workers to be more connected than ever. Your digital transformation will allow people to leverage more technologies, more feedback loops, much more information, In other words, digital transformation enables people to be more successful and more productive in real time. Secondly, and we all know this, technologies continue to explode and abound. This creates opportunities for companies to address demand for their customers not only at a macro level, but at a micro level as well. And when you dig in at a micro level, you're supporting changing demand at an ever-changing level. You're dealing with more SKUs, much more product variation, and a lot of customizations. When you have to support this much change, it can create havoc in manual systems. Digital transformation allows you to take advantage of automation and smart technology, which connects people and machines far more productively. Lastly, the third point, and this is my favorite one because I think this is where Asterix has such a big impact on the market. There is an ever-increasing gap in skilled labor. In fact, to support this, let me share with you a study that was published by Korn Ferry recently. It predicts that by 2030, the talent shortage will reach more than 85 million people. It's kind of tough to wrap your head around when you think about 85 million people. So let me try to put this in context. That's more than the population of California, Texas, and Michigan combined. So we're talking about a big need for hard-to-find people. Digital transformation creates the opportunity to support remote teams and to be much more flexible and effective with human capital. So in summary, digital transformation connects people, it allows you to harness the power of your technology investments, and it provides an advantage when hiring the best people at the right time.
So it sounds like it's a case of no time like the present then, which leads to the next question. How can you at Astrix help our listeners with their own approach to digitally transforming their labs?
Yeah, so let's remember at Astrix we're an independent scientific consulting company, so vendor agnostic, and as Bridgette alluded to in the last response, we're really focused less on technology and more on the people, the work processes, the work practices, and we actually have real, honest, feet on the ground scientists that have experience working in these laboratories, and they're going to work side by side with you to solve these types of problems. Let's forget about the TLAs or the specific vendor solutions. Don't try to squeeze a square peg in a round hole. Let's step back, really figure out what are the meaningful changes that need to happen. What's the best fit for the work process and the requirements to make that change happen? Digital transformation, it starts with clear objectives, tangible goals, that include defining true end-to-end work processes, as I mentioned. And these things can result in some real tangible outcomes in reasonable timeframes that I shared earlier. For example, if you take a single lab, right, like an analytical component, maybe in a larger company, identifying an analytical step within a lab where, let's say, a chemist submits essential materials for characterization. That's a really small, bite-sized piece, but it's a workflow, and you can map it out end to end. How do the samples come in? How do the materials flow? What do we produce, in return to provide to the next group? So defining what that package of data actually looks like, that's a digestible piece of problem. You're not trying to eat the whole elephant here. So keep it end to end. Don't break it down any further than that, and pick a starting place. And that starting place could be in the middle. It doesn't have to be at the beginning or the end. It really doesn't matter. But once you get a piece done, it allows you to move in either direction. And Asterix is staffed with the right mix of science and IT expertise to help you navigate through whatever digital transformation journey you're on, and no matter how big or small the program is.
Wow, Dale and Bridgette, this has been a really informative overview. Thanks to you both for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, this has been Kim Decker, contributing editor for LCGC, and thanks to all of you for listening.
You've been listening to LCGC's podcast, Achieving Digital Transformation Within the Scientific Laboratory. This podcast is brought to you by Astrix Technology Group, a global leader in laboratory informatics serving the scientific community. To find out more, please go to www.astrixinc.com.